Hello everyone, my name is Austin Shaner and welcome back to my channel. We've reached part 4 of how to build a guitar in Fusion 360. You'll notice though I'm not in Fusion 360, and there's a very good reason for that. Because since my last video, I have been preparing for this video and I have been furiously trying to perfect the headstock transition, and I have not been able to do it. It is still by far the hardest part of the guitar to model. However, I have gotten very, very close. And so I want to go ahead and share you guys some of the strategies I've used to get me really close to the perfect headstock transition. What actually helped me in the past couple weeks though is when I was really brain locked, let's say, trying to figure out the best way to do it, sketching everything up, I just decided to 3D print some of my best attempts, and that actually proved to be immensely valuable for me. This particular one was done with the patch tool, which I'm going to be showing you guys today. But what this let me do is it let me actually get my hands on it and see what's going on. What shapes do I have? What does the cross sections look like, etc. I even cut a few apart to see, okay, do I have a parabolic curve there, or do I have, a perfect arc? What's going on? So I want to show you pros and cons of two methods that I've printed out, but today we're going to go ahead and go over the fillet style, which is definitely the easiest, but has some drawbacks. We have the patch tool, which is definitely the most universal to multiple different types of designs, but it also has some drawbacks, which we'll go into. And I'm also going to show you lofting, of course, because that's what we do on this channel. I will say though, the lofting is by far the hardest. You definitely have the most control, but it's very hard to produce a loft or produce the rails for the loft when you don't already have the shape available. And so it's a little bit of guesswork and kind of just figuring everything out. So let's go ahead and start with, actually let me grab that back. What are we trying to accomplish with the headstock transition? Right? So obviously we've got the neck coming from the body in. We've got the headstock, which unfortunately I don't have a printer large enough to print that on here. And then we've got, in some cases, a volute area, which is basically both for ergonomics, so your hand has something to kind of hit, but it also helps strengthen the headstock as well, because you've got end grain and the wood sticking out here, and it makes it less likely to snap. So in general, it's pretty common to believe that volutes are pretty necessary for guitars, but there's definitely a lot of great guitars that don't have them. So from a modeling perspective, what challenges do we run into? So the first thing that I would say is we're starting from a 2-point shape. So one here, one here. You could have a center point here and a center point here, but really you've got a 2-point shape. Trying to turn into a 4-point shape. And so if you were to just say loft from this shape to this shape, what would end up happening is these 2 points would come to these 2 points, and then this point would grab arbitrarily somewhere along this line and create a direct straight line back and put a big crease right in the middle of it. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that the actual center line of it actually travels up and out. And so that actually means we're going from a 2-point shape to a 5-point shape. And so in order to actually get this fully defined, we need to have at minimum of 5 rails essentially in order to get it defined. So that presents a big problem because everywhere in between here is a shape that we don't know how to make, right? Because it starts with this curve here and then warps into a straight line out here. Now you could imagine that you've got an arc that turns into a line. So if you warped that line up, that would give you the transition that you want. The problem is that this becomes a 3D sketch arcing down here, not only down but also over and forward, and so it's traveling in 3 directions. And that is very hard to do with 3D sketches in Fusion 360. Now you can do it with splines. So you could do a 3D sketch from here to here and then constrain the, I forget what they're called, but basically the tangency lines. You could constrain those a little bit, but then once you, let's say I make that parallel to this face, well, I can make that line as long as I want. And if I make it longer, then all of a sudden it distorts the shape. And so I don't have a way to just draw from this point to that point, or, you know, this point to the center of this, without actually knowing the shape that I want ahead of time. So that creates a big problem for us. So what I tried to do when I printed off this, this headstock transition was I tried to imagine what was the shape that this would turn into if it kept going, right? So if this line, let's look at it this way. If this line went all the way up until it met this face, what would that shape actually be? So if you imagine again that this arc basically kept coming up, then maybe I could model that shape and then just cut this section out of it. And that actually proved to be really helpful. I almost got it working, but I still ran into the rail problem where, okay, well, I don't know what that shape is supposed to be, so I need to use what I think is the right rails, and I always ended up with creases in my model. So what the patch tool does, which is really cool, is it takes basically a boundary line. So let's say from here down around here, up this curve, back, up, and around, right? You can basically highlight the boundary and it will fill that boundary on a infinitely thin plane to whatever's mathematically easiest to fill that. Sorry for stumbling on my words there. It's kind of complicated to explain. But basically you can just select the boundary and it does all the math for you, which is amazing. But there's a problem with that. So what will happen is, if you imagine, let me grab a piece of paper here. It's an old manual. So if I drew a line from point A to point B and I told it to stitch or patch in between there, it would probably do something like that, right? Because it doesn't know, based on what I've given it, that it wants it to be straight. So it'll kind of dip down in order to get tangent. And so you actually still have to use rails with the patch tool, but you can still get really good results with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch to the computer soon, and I'm going to show you the fillet style first, because that is definitely the easiest, and that'll get most people where they want. I'm going to then show you the patch tool and how you could approach that, and then we'll start digging into the lofts. Okay, so jumping into Fusion 360, I do want to say something before we start on the headstock. Last episode we kind of left off on a little bit of an awkward note where I hadn't finished the body to neck transition. Since that time I have gone ahead and finished it, as you can see here. But don't worry, before this episode's done, I'm going to go back and show you exactly how I accomplished that. But since we were just talking about the headstock, let's go ahead and worry about that first. So the first thing we're going to want to get in place is the neck profile close to the headstock. So that way we can eventually loft between here, but it gives us a good starting point for the headstock. Now, where you place that neck profile sketch, it kind of depends on where you want the peak of the volute to land. So you do need some space between the peak of the volute and that neck profile. You don't want those two touching, unless you're not using a volute, then you wouldn't do that. But if you're using a volute, you don't want them touching. You want a little bit of space between them. So if you want your volute, the peak of your volute to land at the nut, then I would put your neck profile sketch at your first fret. If you want it more like mine, where it kind of sits a little bit further back, then you can go ahead and put it at the nut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put it at the nut. So I'm going to go plane at angle right here, 90 degrees, and we're going to sketch on that plane.
Okay, let me hide the body real quick and hide this component. Okay. So create arc. Now I'm going to just give myself an arc, and I'm going to make that coincident to that point, that coincident to that point. And I'm going to project in that line so that we have a closed sketch. And I want to dimension the height. So I'm going to draw a line here from the midpoint to the center of the nut, make it a construction line, and then we'll just give that a dimension. Now I'm going to choose 0.6 because I know from experience modeling this, that's what I want. But if you don't know the height of what you'd like it to be, then I would do a little bit of research on your truss rod and other similar style bodies or guitars that are going to use the same shape that you want, and see what those neck profile dimensions are. A lot of manufacturers have that kind of dimensions either on their website, or you can do a quick Google search and figure that out. I know that I would like it to be 0.6 here. Keep in mind we're also going to have a 1/4 inch fretboard sitting on top of that, so it's not like that's going to be way too thin. So I'm going to go ahead and close that sketch. Now what we could do is we could loft between here and here, or the sketch right here. So if I could just go create loft and then make sure that it's following these, and I could even add these as rails if I want to make sure that it's lining up. But we don't actually have to do that right now. What I'd like to do is go ahead and focus on getting the headstock modeled and then connect the two, because what's happened to me in the past is if I did that first, then occasionally the headstock transition might not come out the way you want. So we're going to go ahead and do that first, and now let's go ahead and take a look at the headstock. So in the headstock sketch, let's go back to our original master sketch. Now we're going to do the fillet style first, like I mentioned, and then we'll do the patch and then the lofting. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to draw the volute. Now, what I really recommend is that you just do this in 3 arcs, because it makes everything, at least as far as I'm concerned, everything a lot easier. So you go 3 arcs like this, and make sure those are tangent to that line between these 2 wing areas. Make sure all of these are tangent, so this one and this one. And you can go ahead and make these 2 vertical, so that way it kind of centers itself up. And now you can kind of see, we can kind of figure out what the shape we'd like that volute to look like. Do we want it to come to a pretty narrow point? Some people even do a straight point like that. Or do we want it to be a bit more soft, right? So I generally like mine. Oop, I lost my vertical here. Let me fix that. So I like mine to be a little bit softer and sit a little bit further back. So I'm going to do that. Let's give this a dimension of like 0.75. Let's see, where are we not constrained? Okay, we need the dimension between here and here, or here. Or we could also dimension these. What I'm going to go ahead and do is make these 2 equal. And then let's bring this back like 1. There we go. That's roughly what I generally like. And that should work. So let's go ahead. Oh, we need to dimension this. Let's make these 2 equal and see if that solves it. No. Oh, my model's getting a little away from me here. Hold on. From here to here. Make these 2 tangent. Make these 2 equal. Okay, I'm just going to redraw this real quick. I apologize. So let's go create arc. From here to here, make it tangent to that. Make this one tangent to that. Make these 2 vertical to each other and equal to each other. Make this one equal to that. And now I just need to draw an arc between there. So arc like that. And then now I can just dimension it. Okay. Let's do 1.25. Okay, I'm not sure why that's not fully constraining right now, but that's okay. We don't need it for what I'm about to show you. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is extrude this up. So how high this is depends on how high you want from the fret, or from the where the fretboard connects to the top of the volute. So I know in my design I want it to be 1 inch, but it could be whatever you want depending on your design. So hit OK. We'll extrude that up. Okay, so now in order to run our fillet, we can just, sorry, I didn't explain that. I can just click this right here, extrude that into the body, and go join. Hit OK. And now all we need to do is we just need to run a fillet across this. So I can hit this line, hit fillet, start expanding it, and you can see what's happening. And the more I go, right, it's going to start warping this, but that's okay. Now, this might be a scenario where actually, if in the fillet scenario, I probably should have put my neck profile a little bit further back. So let's actually go ahead and do that real quick. What I'm going to do is I'm going to redefine this sketch plane here. See if I can do that. Roll this back. Edit feature. And I don't want to use that line. I want to use this line. Okay, go back to my sketch. It's probably broken. Just the extrude's broken. Nope, nope, that's broken too. Okay. I'm just going to delete that altogether. Go create arc from here to here to the midpoint there. That'll work for now. Okay, let's show our sketches and let's extrude into the body. It doesn't matter how far you go into the body, it just needs to connect to the body. So I'm going to hit join, hit OK. Okay, now let's try the fillet again. So if I run this, you can see what's going to happen is it's going to start creating that volute for me. Okay, so that kind of gets me pretty close. This kind of goes into one of the problems with the fillet command. So the fillet is trying to resolve both this right here and this break here, and so it kind of leaves a weird little piece right here. But you can see it's already giving me my radius there. And it's already connecting me to the side. Now you'll notice as soon as this line right here goes past this wall, it starts to bring that wall out. So right here, it's bringing that out. So you need to pay attention when you're using the fillet command to make sure that it's not changing the overall shape of your design. And usually that's a sign of this point going beyond that. So let's do like right there. That should be pretty good. Now that looks a little bit awkward, but let me hide the lines real quick. Let's go visual style shaded. That's not a bad looking neck transition, and that was really fast and really easy to put together. All we would need to do now is just cut out the top, which I can show you in a second, and cut out the bottom. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Sketch on the center plane. And what I want to do is project in this line, and this line. Let's go draw a line between these 2 points. Draw a line down. Don't worry about the dimensions for now. Create arc from the end point. So we want it to start right there, and we want it to be tangent to that line. Let's go ahead and make this horizontal. And now we can dimension how much of that we'd like it to cut away. So I'm going to say 1/4 inch. And then it's also going to ask me, where do I want this, how big do I want this arc? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to project in this corner, so that way, if you imagine I drew a line here, it's going to swoop down to there, and then it's going to be straight from that point further back. So let's drag this back, or let's project this in first. Okay. Come on. There we go. And I'm going to make this vertical to that right there. So that way what I can do is I can now grab this and I can hit extrude and cut through it. So all symmetric, hit OK, and there you go. So now you've got the back side of the volute and the front side of the volute. And that's actually a pretty good looking transition. But like I said, it really depends on the size, because it can mess up this corner. It can also, you're kind of just getting whatever shape the fillet gives you here. And if you think it looks nice, do it by all means. And also it kind of leaves a little bit of a flat spot there where it's not really tapering away, because the fillet only is applying to those two areas. So everything here is the original body. So I personally, for my design, don't really like using that method, but hey, if that works for your design, it is by far the fastest and easiest way to do this. And I would highly encourage you using it if it works for your design. You'd save yourself a ton of heartache. Okay, so let's move on to the patch command. First, I want to give you a little demo of kind of how it works, and then we'll apply it to the headstock. So you can find the patch command in the surface workspace rather than the solid workspace. So if I click surface up here, go patch, what it does is it lets me select a boundary, right? So I can either select that, hit OK, and it's created a surface for me rather than a thick body. So this has no thickness at all, but it's filled in that space for me. Or what I could do is I can go patch, make sure enable chaining is turned off. And let's say I go here to here and I'm selecting the boundary. And I go here, here, and then here. What it will do is it'll immediately try to fill in however it thinks is best. It'll try to fill in those voids. Again, it only creates a surface body. So one thing you can do once you have this all connected, so let's say I patch that down there, hit OK, and let's say I patch this and this together. Now that it's closed, and what I can do is I can select these three surfaces that I've made, and I can go modify stitch. What it will do is it'll then take those three bodies, here, here, and here, and it will turn it into a solid body for me. And now it's actually a regular solid body that I can manipulate however we normally do in the solid workspace. So that's roughly how it works, but let's actually apply it to the guitar. So let me delete these. Now I've gone ahead and taken the effort to fix my constraints on my volute and set it up the way I want for this. But essentially it's the same thing. You draw the volute how we said, you put the neck profile close or near the nut, wherever you'd like it to land. So here's where things get a little bit more interesting. So I'm actually going to extrude this up just like we did before, 1 inch. And what I want to do is I want to create multiple headstocks. And that seems kind of weird, but it'll make a lot more sense in a moment. So what I'm going to do, let's actually sketch on here first and project in that line, and let's draw in the radius that we want, and then I'll show you why I'm going to make multiple headstocks. So let's go create arc from here to here, make it coincident to that point if I can highlight it. There we go, make it coincident. And I want it to be tangent. So I'm going to draw, since I have nothing to make it tangent to, I'm going to draw a construction line here. Like that, make that horizontal, make that vertical, and now I can make that tangent to each other. So now it's going straight back. So that's the radius that we want it to cover. And then we've got this one right here and that one right there. So let me get out of this. And let me show you how the patch works now, real quick, although it's not perfect yet. So if I click this, here, 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 keep going all the way around, it's going to try to fill in that section. It's amazing. It already looks pretty good. And now I can use an interior rail, just like we do with the lofts. I can set interior rail, click that, and it's going to constrain. So if I deleted that, you can see what happened. It's trying to figure out the best way to do that, and so it's not actually following that guideline. So let's hit that. So now that's following it. Now if I just hit OK, already, that's a pretty beautiful transition. So this is why I was saying the patch tool is really cool. One of the downsides to the patch tool is that it, like I mentioned with the paper, is it sometimes tries to find, it dips a little bit and it's kind of hard to see. But like, for example, in some of these areas right here, it's not actually coming tangent anymore. It's coming down at like an angle. And so that means that when I actually connect my headstock to my body, it's going to have a little bit of a lip there. But honestly, with how easy this was to get a near perfect transition, I might just settle for that. But let's delete this and let me show you why I want to create multiple headstocks. So I'm not sure if you noticed, when I used the patch tool, I was able to select lines on an existing body. I didn't actually have to make a sketch. So that means I didn't have to figure out the rails per se. I could just take an existing body and make that part of my patch. So what I can do is, watch this. If I draw here, let's flip this back around. I know I like working from this angle. Come on, there we go. Okay, so if I do that same cutaway we did earlier, so let me project this in, and let me project in that line and that line. And let's go ahead and draw both the top and bottom cutaway. So let's go arc that, project in that dot like we did before, make that vertical. Sorry, I'm going to do this real quickly. And there. Make that horizontal, vertical. Dimension that, 0.25. Make sure that, oop, I have an extra line there. Make sure those are coincident and make sure they're tangent. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Arc, let's project in that dot. Go create arc. But this time I want to go from the nut. So let's project in that. Create arc. Like that. Make those vertical. Draw the line out. Oh, I went too far. Hold on. Vertical, horizontal. There we go. Sorry about that. Connect those two, make them tangent. And let's give that a 1/4 of an inch as well, just for sake. Right, so in theory, what you'd have is you've got your rail coming up, the back of the volute dimensioned, and the cutaway from the front, so that way the tuners, again, have a downward string angle. So I need to connect that real quick before I can show you this. So let's draw between there and there. Oh, I'm still not connected. There we go. Okay. So let me cut this away as well. Same thing we did before. All symmetric. Okay. So here's the problem is because we need this perimeter right here, when I cut away the bottom, it's now not connected and I can't use it as a boundary. So I need to actually have two different headstocks or rough models like this, one where I've got the top and one where I've got the bottom. So what we can do, let me go back and just delete that. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and cut this one, or let's extrude this up real quick and join it to there. And now let's cut through that. Both sides, all symmetric. So now you can see on the bottom side, it's actually still connected, right? But the top side, it's not. So we need two different ones, one where we've got the bottom and one where we've got the top. And you can pick different lines from different bodies for this patch tool, which is really cool. So let me hide this one. And now let's extrude this one up to object, nope, distance 1 inch like before. Okay, let's show our boundaries and let's cut this one through. All symmetric, done. Okay, so now we've got basically a combination of two, right? I've got my line here and my line up here. And then I've also got my connection to the bottom and my connection to the top. So now what I want to do is go patch from this arc to here. Actually, nope, not that. Open up our body where it's connected, and we want to go up here. And then come up. Let's show the other one. Okay, so actually, I did that wrong. Let me show you why. So on the one with the top, I want both cut away. Let's go all symmetric. Okay. So this one, it's okay that it's not touching. The other one, it really matters. So let's go back to the patch tool and do this again. Patch. Hide the body from this arc to here, like that. Then hide this body, show this one, and I want to go up here, from here to here to here, and go all the way around. And then hide this body, show this one, and connect it. Now if I hide that, now you can see what I've done is, oh, let me get myself on my rail real quick, like that. Okay, so now not only do I have a transition, I've got the transition up in a 3D curve up to where we want the headstock to sit. So now I can hit OK. It's pretty cool. So that's basically a really thin strip of our perfect transition. So let's go ahead and start patching. So let's close up that. Now we can show our body. And now what's interesting is I actually don't like connecting stitched surfaces to an existing body because sometimes it leaves weird little gaps. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to patch together the rest of the headstock and not even use these bodies anymore, but I'm going to use them as the building blocks. So let's go ahead and patch from here to here, here. Done. Patch from here to here, like that. Do the other side. Patch here, like that. We can patch the bottom. So let's patch around this curve here, like that. Actually, I'm going to take that off. I'll show you why. Let me hide my sketches. They're kind of getting in the way. Take these off. Go around, and then we're going to go ahead and come around this way to close it up, but it's not quite creating a good curve yet. You see it's kind of leaving this little spot here. So I'm going to go ahead and use this curve as an internal rail to kind of help it force it a little bit more into alignment. It's still not perfect, but it's pretty damn close. Okay, hit OK on that one. Let's show our body again. Oh, we already did. So now we just need to close up the top. Let's hit patch. You can see it's completely hollow inside. Patch here, here, up around this curve, like that. Now it's kind of creating a little hump there. So let's go back to our body. And let's hide these other ones. So let's hit cancel on that one. Let's open up our body and let's... No, we do have that line there. Okay. So let's go back. Patch from here, here, like that. Okay. Show our body again. Internal rail. We're going to select that line that's up top here, which is going to help bring that down a little bit, but you can still see that there's a little hump there. So what I want to do is actually show the sketch that I made earlier right here and use that as a rail. Now it's still pinching it a little. I can make that look nicer if I put a little bit more time and add more rails. But let's hide the body. Okay, so now we've got a couple faces that are flipped inside out. So first thing we're going to want to do is fix those. So select all the faces that are yellow and then go modify, reverse normal, hit OK. So now it's turning them right side in. And now what I can do is I can select all these bodies, come up and hit stitch. If you've got green on all sides, that means it's going to completely close. If you had one that wasn't, like let's say this surface right here wasn't stitched or patched together, then that would be a red line. Go ahead and hit OK. And now we've got a solid body. So let's go ahead and show. So you can see we used multiple headstock bodies to get that, but what we ended up with was a new body that had the entire shape that we wanted. So all we need to do now, effectively, if this is the design we wanted to go with, all we would need to do now is loft between these two. So you go from here to here. Go back to your solid workspace because we don't want to loft with a 2D dimension or an infinitely thin wall. So go back to your solid workspace and hit loft. And you can connect those two. And let's show the sketches. Just for good measure, let's add these as rails. Okay, doesn't like that one, that's fine. And let's hide our sketches. So, like I said before, some of these parts don't come completely tangent. And so there's like a little bit of a step there, but that's very, very faint and easily sandable. And I'm sure if I put a little bit more time into it with my rails, I could make that look a lot nicer. But that is one solid surface that has basically been figured out for us, rather than us having to produce the rails in order to design it. And what's really cool is because it's just auto-calculated, you can go back to your headstock sketch and let's say like I want to change this to something a bit more pointy. So let's say like 0.875, or no, let's go even further, 0.75. Come back, it'll recalculate, and it's updated. And so now I have more of a sharper curve there. Or I can go back, make it significantly wider. So let's say like 2 inches. Come back. Let it load for a second. And it's already updated. So that's pretty sweet. And it's not leaving any flat spots here. It's immediately tapering away, unlike the fillet command. But also, if I look at it from a top-down view, you can see that it's actually following this curve because we did it this way. Whereas on the fillet, it might extend past or too sharp and not actually follow that line. But because we used the boundary, it had to go to that line, and we ended up with a really, really nice transition. Again, obviously you can see some of these pinch marks. One way you could do this is to add more rails so that it's more defined. But you could also you could patch up to the higher surface without the cut volute and then just cut through all of it together at the end. And that might actually produce a better result. But yeah, that's kind of how the patch command works. I hope that all made sense. But that is the easiest way to get as close to the perfect transition as possible. Lofting will get you probably closer, but it also takes significantly more work. So I'm going to go ahead and start setting up for that, and we'll be back in a second. Okay, thanks for waiting. I know in virtual time it was a snap of the fingers, but it took me about 20-30 minutes to get that set up. So I do apologize, but let me go ahead and walk you through how I got this loft. It's almost dead on perfect. You can see there's some small creases there, but I will show you why this method is still not quite right. But let me go ahead and show you how I set this up. So this is a really, really unique loft. I've never quite done one like this, although it is somewhat reminiscent of the one we did over here. If I can highlight it, where we came from this arc and swooped up to a different plane up to that arc. It's not too dissimilar to that. But I had to really think outside of the box for this one, because what I originally tried to do in my old model was to connect from here to here, down to here, and swoop down to this surface kind of like a fillet. I also tried, like I mentioned at the beginning when I was in front of my toolbox, that I also tried to imagine a line coming up here until it was on the same level as these two and making that shape. And I got fairly similar to this, but trying to draw rails like on this curve in a 3D way is just really irritating. And let me show you how I got this, which I believe is the best loft I've been able to do so far. So let me show all the sketches real quick. So just like before, I drew the volute and I drew the neck profile, exact same steps. The difference here is instead of trying to loft from that 2-point profile, I actually looked at what other shapes I had available. So I have an arc here, another arc here, an arc here, kind of like a recurve shape. Well, I have an arc here and an arc here. And so like this one kind of naturally extends up to that one. Well, if I try to do it normally and just loft from here to this back surface, then like I mentioned at the beginning, I get a harsh crease. But what if I actually extended that shape down off of the part? So I'm not even modeling on the part anymore. I'm modeling out in the ether, just to give myself some more points. And so what I actually did was just mimic the shape I have here as if it swept down. And if it swept down, then that means that I can actually loft the cut. What the challenge, the real game changer for me was I had tried that before. But every time I had tried that, I had tried to make like this point go to that point, right? I had never actually I always tried to do it in one arc from this point to that point or this point to that point. What was unique about this one is I actually just let this be part of the rail. So instead of trying to loft to that, I just let that be part of the rail and I extended it down off of the part until I had a similar shape to right here. So like this one and this one and that one. That's really what I'm cutting. And then I'm just telling it the direction. So I already knew the radius that I wanted for my volute. And all I had to do here was make this tangent to that and make it connected to there. I actually did not care what this shape would look like at all. All that mattered is that it was tangent to this line so that it could actually continue on as a rail. And so all I did was draw this and then create a plane. Let me see. Create two planes here, connected them, made sure that was tangent. Exact same thing over here on both sides. And then let me take off those rails real quick, and I'll show you why I added these ones in the middle here. So if I take off rail 5 and 4, oh, there we go. So what was happening is I actually had a really good result, but the problem is it wasn't following my line here. And that's actually been the really big challenge with me doing these lofts is I've been able to get good lofts, but not actually following that curve. So I ended up adding a rail tangent to this little line right here where the nut is up to that point on the arc. So if I add those rails back in, it got me much closer. Now I totally realize that it is still not perfect. But considering how many different ways I've tried doing lofting and not gotten that result, I'm actually pretty thrilled with how this turned out. So I hope that made sense. Now I intentionally rushed through that because it took me about 30 minutes to set up all those sketches. And we've done a lot of lofting in here, so I felt like you guys probably understood the concept, but I wanted to show you the unique approach I took to that. Because I didn't try to loft from the C shape. I actually just, let me go before the loft real quick. This was the body that I cut out of. And then all I had to do was tell it the direction, and that worked significantly better. So what's cool about this is I was able to do it in one loft for the entire thing. So I have one solid surface. That's actually better than my original model. So I'm really happy with that. And what's also cool is it is tangent to this surface. So I don't have the same problem that I have with the stitch or patch for that matter. The problem again that I ran into with this one, which is why I'm still not happy with it, is it's not actually following the curve that I want. So that's kind of a problem. It might be better if I made this radius larger, then they might actually end up coming together. But I really would like a way to be able to just, you know, model it the way I had it drawn. Another downside to this as well, although it looks good, is that if I go back to my headstock sketch, all these sketches that I just connected for that loft are so codependent that if I try to change anything in here, let's go create arc, or I'm gonna mess it up. So if I try to change that, it breaks a lot of these sketches, and then I have to, every time I want to change that dimension, I have to go back and fix the sketches, and that's really quite irritating. So that's why I'm actually really starting to prefer the patch command for this kind of a tool, or not tool, for this kind of a model. But the loft has definitely given me a really, really good result. It's just so tedious and really difficult to figure out. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the result I've got, and hopefully what I've shown you makes sense and you might be able to apply it to your model. The only thing remaining for me to do on this is to actually just cut through those sketches on the neck. Let me see if I still have them. I might have deleted them. Yeah, I deleted them. But basically I just need to cut through the top for the volute and cut through the bottom. And then I'd be back where I was with the patch. So please let me know if you have any more questions on how to loft the headstock. I know I rushed through the lofting portion of it, but I'd be happy to help as much as I can. It just would have taken way too long for me to show you how I drew that in detail. So hopefully you guys seeing this is enough to get the idea and start trying to apply it on your own models. Okay, so last but not least, we need to do a little house cleaning from the last episode. So last time we left it off with kind of a rushed attempt at trying to model through the back of the body, and I do apologize for that. I tend to want to keep those errors in my videos because I feel like it's important to show that, hey, this is a difficult process, and even people like me who've done this a lot can still run into errors. And so I went ahead and left it in the video, even though it kind of was a little awkward. So I hope you guys forgive me for that. But let me go ahead and show you what a decent back of the body looks like. So I basically did exactly the same thing that I did around the contour in episode, I think, 2. But the only difference is I did kind of a unique strategy with the triangles here. So like before, I extended these off so that way it would start on the outside and then cut in. But then here, I kind of imagined, well, it's kind of an even shape going around. And so what I ended up doing was drawing a sketch from the midpoint of this arc all the way back as if I had like a right triangle. So that way there was an equal amount of distortion going this way and an equal amount going the other way. And that ended up leaving me with a pretty good result. Now, if you wanted to cut through the back of the body and the neck at the same time, like I was trying to show in the last video, really the only difference that you'd have to do, let me see if I can pull up these sketches here and I'll show you. Really the only difference is that this plane that this sketches on just needs to be lower. So if you brought that down, below the actual, so like let's say this line right here continued into right here and up, then you could actually end up cutting through both at the same time. But effectively, it's the same strategy. And you don't have to do a triangle like I did. I just did a triangle to match the contour that I did on the rest of the body, but it could totally be an arc. So it could be, a nice curve that swoops right into the neck, and you could cut through both the neck and the body at the same time. One other way that you could definitely approach this, which I haven't actually tried, although I have a strong suspicion that it would work really well, is to look at some of the other shapes we have here. Actually, let me bring those sketches back up. So we have a shape here, right? And then we have another shape here that's very, very similar. And then we also have another one right here, right? So you could imagine that instead of lofting around the body, I could actually loft from the top down to the bottom. So I would flip the orientation that I'm actually lofting in. And then this, instead of being part of my profile, could actually be part of my rail. So this could be a rail that continues into this section here, right, and goes all the way down to the bottom. This one could do the same thing. This could go from here down to the bottom. This one right here could go from here all the way down to the bottom. And so I would loft from up here to down here, all the way to down here. And that would actually probably work really well, especially if you're trying to cut both through the body and the neck at the same time. If you guys are still really struggling with modeling through the neck and the body at the same time, let me know. I'd be happy to try to do another video showing just that technique alone and seeing if we can solve it together. But for now, I think this video has gone on long enough. I hope what I've shown you guys will help. I realize that everybody's design is different, both for the body and for the headstock. But what I tried to do with this video is give you guys some ideas, because like I said, every headstock is different, and knowing what tools you have available for use is probably more important than what you're actually designing, right? Because how you use the tool sometimes dictates how you design the body or how you design the part. And so I figured I'd show you the fillet, which again is by far the easiest and the fastest and produces a pretty decent result. So again, if you If you use that method and you like it and it looks good and it does what you want, absolutely do it. Save yourself the heartache of going through the other steps. The patch command was definitely the most universal and the most modular, so I could adapt things and update my design a lot easier. So I think that's a really great route, although it does suffer from kind of weird geometry sometimes. So it might leave little lips and creases where you don't want them, but the ease of use and the modularity of it is really hard to pass up. And then the lofting obviously is the most tedious, but you also have ultimate control over everything in the shape. It's just very difficult to figure out the right shape to create with this. So take that information that I gave you and start testing it out on your model. So if you're having trouble figuring out how to model your headstock, try a few of those different attempts and see what works. If you have a particular design that none of these seem to work at all, message me and I'll see if I can find a way to make that either work for you or give you some tips that might help you get further along. So thank you all for joining me on episode 4. I really appreciate it. In the next episode, I'm going to have all this tidied up, and we're going to start working on some of the hardware and some of the other details. So the core of the body and the neck and the headstock are basically done. Now we need to start adding all the little details like the fretboard and the truss rod slot and pockets for the bridge and the tuners and the pickups and everything, and start working on all that. So thank you again. I'll see you in a little bit. Have a good night.